Let's pick up where we left off on number 2. So number 2 is titled Missing School. So the scatter plot below compares the number of days a student was absent and their final grade. So each point is a student in class, and it tells us two things. It tells us the days they were absent and their final grade. So to sum that up, I'm going to have you pause and answer the first two questions on your own again. What does the horizontal or the x-axis represent? And what does the vertical axis represent? Pause and answer these two questions on your own first, reading the graph. So the horizontal, the one that goes left to right, the x-axis, is the days absent. So on the x-axis, we have days absent. And on the y-axis, the one that goes up and down, the vertical one, we see that we have grades. And we know that looking at the title, or the description, that is a final grade. So we're comparing the days a student misses school and their grade overall, their final grade. So each point is a particular student, and it tells us two things. It tells us how many days were they absent and what was their overall grade. So in this case, this point right here, oh, actually, let's talk about this point down here. Let's talk about this point right here. So this point is a student that was absent for 5 days, and their overall average was maybe 55. Kind of hard to tell, it's under 60, right? And then you see this point next to it, kind of tells us similar, right? Except this case, this student missed 10 days of school and still got about a 65, or I'm sorry, a 55. Or we could talk about maybe this point all the way up here that's on this y-axis that you might not even seen. In this case, the student missed 0 days. He missed 0 days, he or she, and got a 100 for their final grade. So we're comparing how much does a student, how does missing school affect your overall grade? What's the relationship between missing an excessive amount of school days, just meaning missing a lot of school days, in your overall grade? What's the relationship there? And again, that's when we talk about the correlation. The correlation is asking, what is the relationship? What do you notice about these data points? So think to yourself, what do you notice about these data points? What's happening to the data? As I read this graph left to right, as I go to the right, what's happening to my data points? Well, they're going down. And because these data points are decreasing because they're going down as I go to the right, that's a negative correlation. Negative means decreasing or going down. So what does negative correlation actually mean? And that's going to answer our stop and jot. So the stop and jots today are really what does that correlation mean? What does that tell us about the relationship between the two things we're comparing? So for this stop and jot, what conclusion can you make? Basically, what is the relationship between the number of days a student is absent and their overall grade? So in this case, we're not going to say negative correlation, even though we know it's negative. This question is asking us, what does that mean in terms of this scenario? What happens as you miss more school? What is the relationship between missing school and your overall grade? Go ahead, pause the video and try this on your own first. So what you hopefully noticed is the more days a student was absent, the lower their grade. In other words, as the days of absent increases, right? So as you miss more days, so as I go to the right, the days I'm absent increase. So as the days absent increases, student grades decrease. In other words, the more you're absent, the lower your grade. That's the relationship or the trend. Again, there's some points that might say things otherwise, right? This point might say, I only missed 5 days and I still, got under a 60. Or maybe in the case of this point up here, I was absent more than 10 days and I still got a 100. So again, this isn't the case for every single point, but we just want a trend. We want a relationship, a general relationship. So generally, because this is negative, it's going down, what that means is the more days I miss, the lower my grade will probably be. And I think that is, I think that makes sense. The more days you miss, right, the more lessons that you miss, the less that you know. So if you're missing a lot of days and you're missing a lot of lessons or you're missing a lot of practice, you're missing, the content, and your grade is going to take effect of that, right? The more you miss school, the lower your grade's going to be. Let's move on to number 3. So in this third real life scenario, we're talking about televisions. And the scatter plot below compares the average time a person spent watching TV in a week and the size in inches of their home television. Okay, so let's answer the first 2 questions on our own first. What does the x-axis represent? What does the y-axis represent? This is the third time we're doing this, so take a look at this new scatter plot. Pause and answer those 2 questions on your own first. Okay. So what you noticed is on the x-axis, we see the average time spent watching TV. This is how much a person spent watching TV in a week. And again, each of these data tells us a different data point. So in this case, this is just, in statistics, right? Most of this comes from surveys. So this would be like if I surveyed a class of 20 and I asked 2 questions. How much TV do you watch a week, and what's the size of your television? So each data represents a different person and how much TV they watched, and on the y-axis, the size of their TV. So each point tells me 2 things. It tells me about one particular person, but it tells me about how much they spent watching TV that week, and then the size of their television. Okay. Each dot is a different person having a different answer for how much TV they're watching and the size of their television. So let's describe the correlation. What do you notice about these data points? But what you might notice is that these points are all over the place. They're not increasing, they're not decreasing. These points are scattered all about without a direction. So we know that that means no correlation. There's no direction, there's no pattern here. It's just a bunch of points scattered about. Okay. So what does that mean? In the Stop and Jot, we're going to answer the question, okay, what does no correlation mean in terms of watching TV and the size of your TV, right? So what does this mean in this situation? What conclusion can you make? What do you what's the relationship? What's the trend? What do you notice? Basically, it's all asking the same thing. Between the time spent watching TV and the size of your TV. So what conclusion can you make? Pause and answer this on your own. Okay. Because this has no correlation, because there's no direction, what that means, what no correlation means, is that there's no relationship between the size of your TV and how much TV you watch. There's no relationship. So they're independent of each other. Okay? You can watch a lot of TV and have a small TV. You can watch a lot of TV and have a huge TV. You can watch no TV and have a large flat screen or have a small screen, right? There's no relationship, there's no trend, there's no saying that these 2 are directly related to each other. They act on their own. So let's move on to our final example of a real life scatter plot. This one we're going to bring it back to school, bring it back to academics, and we're going to talk about the power of a good night's rest. So the scatter plot below compares the number of hours a student slept and the grade they earned on their test the next morning. Okay. So each dot represents a different student. And what we did was we took each student in the class and I asked two questions. How much how much sleep did they get the night before? And then I jot down the score on the test the next morning. Okay. So each point is a different student and it tells us two pieces of information. So let's go ahead and answer those two questions again on your own. What does the x-axis represent? What does the y-axis represent? Pause and try this on your own first. So real quick, we know the x-axis, we're looking at the hours of sleep. And then on the y-axis, we're looking at the test score. So real quick, we should be good with reading a graph by now and the labels. So what each point tells us is a particular student. So if we look at this point right here, this student slept 1 hour the night before and got like a 61 maybe, it's a little bit above a 60. Okay, so this one dot tells us two things. It tells us how much hours that particular student slept, and then the score of their test the next morning. Okay. And again, every point, this point right here tells me that this student slept 2 hours and got maybe a 66. Okay. If we go up here, and again, each point tells us a piece of information. It tells us how many hours I slept, and then the score on the test the next morning. Okay, so these are each a different student in their responses to those two questions. So let's describe the correlation. What do you notice about these data points? What do you notice as you read this graph left to right? What happens to the points as we go to the right? Well, they increase. Because these points increase, this is a positive relationship. This is a positive correlation. And I'm going to use the word strong here because these points are very close together. They're very, very close together. I don't see points over here and I don't see points over here. So I'm going to include the word strong, but what I want us to focus on today is what that positive means in terms of this situation. So this is a strong because these points are connected closely, but it's positive because these points are going up. They're increasing as they go to the right. So what does that mean in this situation? What does having a positive correlation mean in this situation? Okay. So our final stop and jot, what conclusion can you make? What is the relationship between the number of hours slept and the grade earned on the test the next morning? Go ahead, pause the video. If you need to reread the question, go for it. Answer on your own. So hopefully we said, the more you sleep, the better you do on the test the next morning, right? So you could keep it simple as that. The more you sleep, the higher you're going to get on the higher your test score will be the next morning. Okay. So as the number of hours increased, test score is increased. Okay. So as the number of hours slept increases, as you sleep more, the test scores go up, the test scores increase. Now we also know that, a good night's sleep and how much you slept the night before isn't the only factor that goes into how well you do on a test, right? Did you study? Were you in class? Did you get that proper practice? Do you understand the material? There's a lot of different questions. There's a lot of different factors or things that go into a good night's. Your test score other than a good night's sleep. But this is just a relationship between the test score and the hours of sleep. And we're noticing that the more someone sleeps, the better they tend to do on the test the next morning. Okay. So go ahead, make sure that you answer that reflection at the end of the page. You're going to look at today's learning goal again and then rate yourself on 1 to 5. Please make sure that all questions are answered. If you need to go back and rewatch something, please do. And then make sure you find that turn in button to let me know that I can go ahead and grade it. Okay? Make sure everything's completed, including this reflection question at the end. Turn it in, and I'll see you in class.